Geek Therapy Radio.
Welcome to the Geek Therapy Radio podcast. I'm your mental curator, Johnny Hamburger, back from vacation on the Guadalupe River. My wife and I stayed in a little rental property cottage thing in Seguin, Texas. And holy mother, was it hot. 106 degrees, 107 degrees. That's before the feels like temperature. But once you get up to those temperatures, the feels like temperature is pretty close. And let me tell you, it felt every bit of 106, 107 degrees Fahrenheit. What would that even be in Celsius? 107 degrees Fahrenheit would be about 41.7-ish degrees Celsius. 41.7 C, 107 F. It was very hot, but it didn't really matter too much because we were on the beautiful Guadalupe River and we had a pretty consistent breeze the entire time we were there. We were there for about 3 days. So you're sitting in the water, in the inner tube, finally, cold beer in hand, cold drink in hand, just sitting there. I probably spent, I don't think I spent as much time sitting on the river that I expected to, or that I perhaps maybe wanted to in the long run. I spent enough time. The last day I spent until well after sunset. I made a rule with my wife. Okay, I'll come out of the water once I can see Jupiter. So I came out of the water once I could see Jupiter. So I spent probably at least 10 hours, at least 10 to 12 hours total on the trip, just sitting in an inner tube on the river, drinking a cold beer, just enjoying, relaxing. It was wonderful. Is anybody else like this? I didn't pack a ton of stuff for this trip, but I still packed too much stuff. And by too much stuff, I mean toys. So I packed up my PSP, which I did play for maybe an hour or so going to bed one evening. I packed my Game Boy Color. I packed my Nintendo Switch. I had my laptop. I had an e-reader. I had my iPad. So I had a fair bit of stuff with me on this trip, thinking, oh man, I would love to just sit in the hammock, which I didn't wind up doing because the hammock sucked. I'm going to sit in the hammock and play Game Boy Color or read Dinosaur Teeth, I think, Michael Crichton book before Jurassic Park. I was going to read my e-reader, sit there and play Game Boy Color, whatever. And I didn't really do that. I played the PSP, like I said, for a little bit and didn't even touch the Nintendo Switch, didn't even touch the Game Boy Color. Does anybody else do that? You're going on a trip and you think, I will definitely use all these things. International flights is a perfect example. When I fly, I haven't flown internationally in, I don't know, since last year, my honeymoon to Portugal. You bring this stuff, it's going to be a 12-hour flight, 13-hour flight or so, more than 10-hour flight. I'm going to bring all this stuff, the iPad, the e-reader, the PSP, the Nintendo Switch, all this stuff. And you really don't wind up. I mean, on an airplane, mostly. You think I learned by doing this, enough times. All I'm really going to do is sit there and lay back and listen to music or watch movies. I don't really need to be bringing a tablet and 2 computers and all sorts of Game Boys. What if I want to play the Game Boy Pocket? So I put the Game Boy Pocket in there. Well, what if I want to play Game Boy Color? Put the Game Boy Color in there. Knowing full well that I can play all those games on the PSP or my Android tablet or on my phone. I pack too much stuff, too many toys. But I guess it's one of those situations. I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. Need is a stretch, but I was going on vacation. So I overpack for international flights and I overpack for sitting on the river. But I did exactly what I wanted to do out there. I sat on the river and I barbecued every single night. Not technically barbecuing, but I had my little travel charcoal grill, had a bunch of steaks and hamburgers. Did we wind up making? Yeah, I think we did make the hamburgers. It was so good. I put the griddle on there on the last night and had whatever meat was left over. I had bacon going, eggs going, steak going, all on the charcoal grill and the skillet. It was exactly what I wanted to do. It was perfect. The reason my wife and I went on this trip is that, as you know, we're about to have the baby come this fall. And why did my computer just shut off? I'm rendering a video behind me on my laptop, a long video, about an hour of me setting up. Come on now. Windows did some update that obviously didn't take too well. Golly, gotta re-render that. It's about an hour of setting up my 286. So, anyways, back to what I was talking about. That's going to be Patreon only, by the way. Back to what I'm talking about. We're taking this trip because we're going to have the baby in the fall, and it's going to be probably a little while before we can take a trip like that again. I'm looking forward to taking trips with my son. That is going to be an amazing experience. I want to do way more road trips with my son. All the memories that you maybe... I can't speak, obviously, for Europeans. I'm American, but it used to be a staple of the American lifestyle and upbringing as a kid is we went on a lot of road trips. You packed in the station wagon or the minivan and you drove from Texas to the Grand Canyon, from Texas to California, from California to Missouri, from Boston to Chicago, Chicago to Seattle. We did these road trips. So it was nice. I call it a short road trip. When we drove these past couple of days, we drove to Seguin, Texas, which is just outside of San Antonio. It's about, I don't know what it is, 150 miles away from Houston. It's about 3 hours or so from Houston. It was a wonderful little road trip. Just nice road trip, listening to ZZ Top. What else were we listening to? It was mostly ZZ Top, Blues Traveler. I hadn't thought about Blues Traveler in forever. Just cranking the road trip tunes. I know that Europeans do road trip, but you don't hear about that being part of the European experience as much as you hear about road trips being an American thing. And that's just because, for simple reasons, Houston and Los Angeles are 1,500 miles apart. More than 3,000 kilometers apart. That's a long, long drive between two major cities. Europe is a little bit more densely populated, densely packed, so it's not really, it depends where you go. Yes, of course. You don't really get these long expansions of, driving 12 hours through a desert the way that you do in the United States. All you see between like Tucson and Los Angeles is desert and gas stations. That's pretty much all you see. Versus I would imagine driving through France, you could probably get something pretty similar, not desert. Probably something similar through Germany. Let's say if you're driving from Paris to Rome, that will probably be a pretty decent road trip. Having been to France and been to Italy, I will say Italy, driving through Italy looked almost exactly like driving through Southern California. Very similar with the hills and with just the climate, the dry, hot climate. When I was in Italy, it was the summertime. It was 105 degrees, just like it was in Texas. Rome, when we were in Rome, it was July. What year was it? 2017. Yeah, it must have been right before Harvey. 105 degrees. There's a lot of marble in Rome. There's a lot of heat just reflected right back onto your body in Rome. So it was very hot. But I'm a Texas boy and I know how to handle the heat. It's the same no matter who you are. People complain so much. They come to Texas. Oh my gosh, it's so hot here. It's so humid here. How do you live with this? How do you bear this? Well, guess what? You just drink water. Stay hydrated. It's the same anywhere in the world. If you're in Rome and it's 105 degrees, or you're in San Antonio, Texas, or Houston and it's 105 degrees, stay hydrated. Just drink water and cool off when you can. Stand in the shade when you can. Go into the air conditioning when you can. But the most important thing is just stay hydrated. You would be surprised what you can endure, what kind of heat and oppressive heat and humidity you can actually endure. I'm not saying it's comfortable. I'm not saying you're sitting there, walking around outside. It's 105 degrees and everything feels like you're, on a perfect beach somewhere. It's 78 degrees Fahrenheit. 30% humidity, whatever. It's going to be uncomfortable, but at least you're not going to be passing out and feeling absolutely terrible. Just stay hydrated, stay cool, stay in the shade as much as you can, but most importantly, just drink water and you'll be fine. Rome has lots of fountains everywhere, public drinking fountains, from the old aqueducts and all that through the history. It's kind of interesting. They're free. They're just throughout the city, and they flow freely, and people are always filling up their water bottles, and I'm filling up my water bottle and splashing my face with the nice cold water coming out of these fountains all over Rome. So no matter where you go, no matter how hot it is, just drink enough water, and you'll be fine. All right, I want to move on. a little bit. Side note, my computer reset because Microsoft, it was an automatic update. I guess it was I turned my back for a little bit and the update needed to happen and it automatically did the update, which means I still have to re-render that video. I wish Microsoft's automatic updates would have enough foresight. Maybe it'll improve in the future a little bit. Hey, we see, we detect that the system is working pretty hard. We detect that the CPU is working on something. There's a lot of components here obviously doing real work. So maybe let's postpone the update until after we see that the system isn't actually working on something. I don't know. With the technology we have in today with PCs and computers and softwares and programming and coding, you think somebody at Microsoft would code into the update, the automatic updates. Don't update if you see that it's rendering video, for instance. Don't update if you see that it's compiling something or that the CPU. Just a vent. I'm just venting right now. That's what we get to do on Geek Therapy Radio is vent about technology things that are stupid, and the fact that Windows updates don't account for seeing if the CPU or the GPU is doing actual work and just screw you. You're 3 hours into a 4-hour render. Screw you, buddy. We are going to update your Windows to something. We're going to break something else in the process. Oh, Windows was running good for you? Let's just break that. Windows updates. What did I want to talk about? So one of the things I want to talk about in this podcast, thank you for bearing with me, by the way, for the past few days when I wasn't uploading podcasts, but your mental curator needed a little break. One of the things I want to talk about today is Starlink. Elon Musk's Starlink, SpaceX's Starlink, basically broadband internet for the entire world based on satellites. Little satellites, thousands of satellites eventually that are going to be circling the globe. So no matter if you're in Antarctica or you're on top of Mount Everest or you're in the middle of the Sahara Desert, you will always have broadband internet. That's really, really, really cool. There have been services similar to this. There has been a way through geosynchronous satellites and whatever. We've had satellite phones forever. There have technically been ways to check your email or send a text from the top of Mount Everest, what have you. There's been ways to do that. This is more consumer focused. This is more think of a rural village in the middle of Africa somewhere that barely has access to electricity. They have a solar panel or a stationary bike that someone pedals to power a light bulb for an hour at night. Picture that village, that remote village, having access to broadband internet, decent speeds. SpaceX says that Starlink eventually will get up to a gigabit of internet bandwidth, once it all gets up and going. There's a few hundred satellites up there right now. I think the projection is to have at least 12,000 satellites within the next couple years or so. Basically, make this giant net, this mesh of satellites up kind of in low Earth orbit above the Earth and bring broadband internet to every corner of the Earth. So I've talked about this a little bit before, and many of you listening have, Starlink has been on your radar, so to speak, for the past couple of years now. It's nothing new. SpaceX and Elon Musk have announced this and started to implement this, and they've started to put the satellites up there. One of my biggest concerns was one, price. How much would it cost? There are people, I'll just use for example, even in the United States. My brother-in-law lives in Virginia in the hills, and it's hard to get internet up there, good, reliable internet. With Starlink, that eliminates that problem. It's just, instead of trying to find a tower somewhere on a hilltop somewhere in Virginia, you're just looking straight up into the sky and you got all the towers you need in Starlink, in this mesh of satellites beaming down broadband internet. Is Starlink ever going to be better than fiber optic internet? You know, let's say you live in Los Angeles and you live right next to your ISP, internet service provider, and it's just like a straight shot of fiber optic cable going from the ISP to your house a half mile away. Is Starlink ever going to be better than that based on radio, because it's based on radio waves? No, it will never be better than land-based high-speed internet options. But to connect the world globally, no matter where you are on the face of the earth, if you're in the middle of the ocean, to have up to gigabit speed internet is going to be a game changer. It's going to be one of the biggest game changers since the telephone itself. This level of access to broadband internet is an absolute game changer. So one was my concern, price. Elon Musk says it's going to be competitive with land-based internet service providers. So figure around $100 or so, and that's going to depend entirely on packages, you know, what tier you want. So around $100 or so, probably more, maybe a little bit less for basic internet. It's going to be price competitive. That's a relief. The second biggest concern, which there's not really a way around this because of physics, and I've mentioned this, is latency in ping, the round trip between sending and receiving data. So let's say you're looking at Mario on the screen, you're playing Mario online, and you press the jump button. How long before you press the button does Mario jump? How many milliseconds of delay? Gamers can argue all they want about their perfect pings and perfect latency. I am just happy I'm happy to play Rocket League anything under 60 milliseconds, because around 60 milliseconds is about a frame at 60 frames per second. So that's pretty good ping, pretty good latency for just your average gamer. The Starlink pings, and before I get to the Starlink pings, many gamers would say that 60 milliseconds ping is trash. Competitive gamers, a lot of them would say that 60 milliseconds is trash because they're playing at high refresh rates. They're playing on 240 hertz monitors, 300 hertz monitors. They would laugh at 60 milliseconds of ping. Single-digit ping is not that uncommon depending on where you live and how close you are to your ISP and where the other players are on the server. A single-digit ping is kind of holy grail, but it's not that uncommon. I've seen it before, but I would say average ping is probably, for me, probably around 16 to 30 milliseconds of ping, which is pretty good, which is really good actually for online gaming. A lot of online gamers would kill for a ping below 100 milliseconds, would kill for it. So the first results of the Ookla tests, the internet speed tests for Starlink, for the closed group of testers that are able to use it and kind of test the service out a little bit. The pings range all over the place, but they look good. We'll talk about pings more in a second. The highest ping I'm seeing is 94 milliseconds, and the lowest ping I'm seeing is 31 milliseconds. Now, to a hardcore gamer, certainly 94 milliseconds of ping is trash, let alone 31 milliseconds of ping. The bandwidth, so the download speeds range everywhere from lowest that I'm seeing on the chart here, about 35 megabits per second, up to about to 60 megabits per second. Now, and uploads are what you would expect for normal broadband, 17.64 megabits per second for consumer broadband, that is, not business. Business class has way faster uploads, way much more bandwidth. I'm seeing 4.58 upload here on Starlink, 12.52 megabits per second upload, 16 megabits per second upload, 6.57 megabits upload. So, it's kind of all over the place. But here's the thing. I was so concerned with ping, and ping is never going to be, just by the nature of physics and radio waves propagating through space, literally, and then back down again to your receiver, ping is never going to get what it can be for land-based internet providers. Certainly not for fiber optic, cable internet. We don't want to even talk about DSL. But it's never going to get down to those numbers. I don't think it's possible. I don't have them, doing the math here on the napkin. I don't have that in front of me, but I don't think it's really even possible to get ping below into single digit range. Below 10. I just don't see how that's possible. The speed of light is the speed of light, and these things are hundreds of kilometers up above the Earth. It's going to take time to go round trip. But that being said, if you are a gamer, and you need those low pings, it's not so much about the bandwidth, it's about those low pings. You might just be up a creek and have to live in a city that's close enough to an ISP that you can get those single digit pings. But that's not really what Starlink is about. It's about providing broadband internet to the rest of the world, to the entire world. And you know what? Even though it's going to get better, even though Elon Musk says that Starlink will get up to gigabit speeds, gigabit bandwidth, even somebody having 50 megabits of download speed, let's say you do live in that rural area of Virginia or anywhere in the world, maybe you're in Romania, maybe you are in Europe somewhere in the hills, in the Alps, or whatever, and you don't have great access to high-speed internet. People up there struggling in those situations, struggling to get even double-digit megabits per second, get above 10 megabits per second. If they got above 1 megabyte per second of a download, that'd be a good day. That means the wind's just right. That means the signal's reflecting off the hills just right. There's not too much moisture in the sky or clouds in the sky, fog somewhere. A lot of people in rural areas would kill for internet that was above single digit megabits per second download. Forget about upload. If they just get above 1 megabyte per second download, they could watch their Netflix without it janking out constantly and buffering and being low quality. That would be great. And that is one of the promises of Starlink. It's 50 megabits per second download is very, very usable. And a lot of people, even with land-based internet, would kill for those speeds. And a ping of 31 milliseconds is really good even for gaming, for casual gaming. 31 milliseconds, that means you can be gaming on a 120 hertz display and get a good experience, a single frame latency experience. Thereabouts, the math is, here and there. But I would be happy with Starlink internet, a ping of 31 milliseconds, getting a download speed of 50.71 megabits per second for Rocket League and watching Netflix and having a couple people actually on the network watching Netflix. That's very usable. So no, the numbers are not staggering, and they may not ever be staggering. But put into perspective, it's actually quite amazing. I'm really excited for Starlink. I don't know if I'm ever going to live in an area that I need to rely on a satellite-based internet service provider like Starlink. As long as I'm living in a populated city like Houston or Los Angeles or anywhere in the Northeast, any populated city really, I wouldn't be really too worried about getting satellite-based internet. It would come down to what can Xfinity provide or AT&T provide versus what can Starlink provide, because sometimes AT&T and Xfinity will come out to your area and be like, all right, the best you can get out here is a ping of 100 milliseconds and a maximum 20 megabit download speed. Sorry, buddy, it's just your neighborhood. Well, in that case, Starlink, even just in these tests, look like they have better numbers, and that would be more viable. It's all about options. Options is always better. How many of you out there listening right now are stuck with crappy internet and wouldn't be chomping at the bit in the first in line for Starlink, for SpaceX Starlink internet to have very usable download speeds and a ping that's not competitive gaming level, but really not too bad. Ping doesn't matter at all for Netflix and content consumption. For downloading podcasts, for watching YouTube, all that stuff, ping doesn't matter. Bandwidth matters. Ping only matters for something like gaming, for instance. That's a good example of why ping matters. If you have a millisecond, like 500 milliseconds of ping, that means there's an entire half second before you press a button and then your character does something. That's unusable garbage. No gamer, you just couldn't do it. You turn it off immediately. So it's really cool. It's very promising. Starlink is very, very promising. Also, switching topics a little bit here. I don't want to get too far into it because, frankly, I haven't researched this enough to have any valid opinions on it other than kind of glancing opinions. It's no news that Intel has been chomping at the bit to get into the graphics game, to get into the GPU game. So Intel has had, Intel Iris graphics and Intel HD 4600 graphics going back. They've had their integrated graphics so you can basically, see things on your computer screen. Intel is getting into the actual, high-end GPU space. They want to compete directly with AMD Radeon and NVIDIA GTX whatevers and RTX whatever. So I think that's good because Intel has to do something to stay viable. AMD is crushing it right now, and any more competition in the GPU segment is going to be a great thing. Intel hopes to first launch their Z. How do you pronounce this? It's XE. Is it G? Z? Chi graphics? I think it's G graphics. In their upcoming Tiger Lake laptop CPUs. So for, they're having problems getting the 10 millimeter. Tiger Lake's integrated graphics are expected to go up against Vega 11 graphics in the Ryzen 4000 series of mobile chips. And Intel says it's going to be able to beat Vega 11 graphics and Ryzen 4000 chipsets by 35%. Now, we don't know. We don't know exactly yet because we can't see. There aren't just millions of benchmarks out in the wild on YouTube for what Intel's upcoming GPUs are going to be capable of. Certainly nothing viable at the moment to base a good opinion on. But the fact that Intel is doing this, and hey, if it's 35% better than what's on, than Vega 11 chipset, great. Benchmarks, it depends on what you're benchmarking. I'm sure there are going to be some games in software that's going to be more optimized that, just runs better on AMD. Then there's some programs that run better on NVIDIA. How is Intel going to get into this mix? When are we going to start seeing, video rendering software taking Intel on board? Yes, they do. You can render solely on the CPU. Yes, you can leverage NVIDIA's existing graphics chipset in the rendering. So it's very interesting going forward. I'm all for a third party jumping into the modern GPU marketplace. All for it. I think, was there anything else I wanted to talk about here? Yeah, one little thing I want to touch on before we wrap it up. Oh yeah, it's something kind of interesting. I never thought I'd see the day that something like this would happen in video games. So recently a copy of Super Mario Brothers was sold for $114,000 at an auction. Well, another copy was sold privately to an investment platform that paid $140,000 for it in a private sale. $140,000 for this Super Mario Brothers NES game. Now, the interesting thing is this. It's interesting that they go for so much money. Obviously, Mario Brothers, of all games. It depends on a lot of things, but you get what I'm saying. It's a lot of money. But the fascinating thing is that this investment firm, if you're catching my drift here, plans on selling shares of the game. just like stock. Like it would be like me. Okay, I see that this person, this company bought Super Mario Brothers for $140,000, and they're anticipating it going up in value to $200,000, let's say. So do you want to buy a share in this game, in this cartridge, so that next time we go to auction, all the shareholders get their cut of the profits in the game? That's interesting. You buy shares in gold, you buy shares in silver and other precious metals, platinum. We live in a world now. We live in a world now where you can invest in shares of high-priced collectible video games. Just let that sink in for a second. How crazy is that? How crazy is that you can invest in a $140,000 copy of Super Mario Brothers on the anticipation that it might be worth $160,000 soon? Buying and selling and trading stocks and shares of video games. You can buy shares in companies that develop video games. You know, you can buy shares in Sony, for instance. Sony and Nintendo, you can buy shares with Nintendo. You can buy shares in companies that make video games and sell video game products. This is actually, some guy went out there and paid $140,000 for a Super Mario game and is now asking people, hey, do you want a piece of this? We might sell this in a year or two for $200,000. Anyone want to be on board and invest in this? I don't even know how much the shares are for the game. I would imagine you can invest in as little or as much as you want. I mean, if you invest $140,000 right now, you own the game now. But let's say 2 or 3 people want to get together. Yeah, I got 50 grand in it. Hey, I'll put 30 grand in it. And then you, me, and anybody else on the smaller scale, I'll put $20 in it. So that when you sell it in the next 2 years, I get $25 out of it. I don't even get enough out of it to adjust for, inflation. It's just the fact that you can now buy shares in individual video games, high-priced collectible video games. That's pretty geeky, if you ask me. All right, I'm going to wrap up the podcast there for today. Thank you so much for listening. You are worthy of love. You are worthy of giving love. You are worthy of receiving love. And you are also worthy of your own self-respect and your own self-confidence. If you're going through something difficult, and you just need someone to vent to, geektherapyradio.com is the best way to get in touch with me directly. Also, the email, geektherapy@iheartmedia.com, is a good way to get in touch with me directly. But if you just need a vent, or you just need to share your geek thing, just need someone to listen to you, someone to hear what you're going through, I guess, or read what you're going through and get a nice response back, encouragement back, whatever, or you found this awesome old cartridge, rare cartridge of NES game, and you want to show it off, show it to me, or you're into some hobby that you would like to share with me and share with others. It's all about sharing other hobbies around here, sharing each other's geek thing around here. Please feel free to do that. geektherapyradio.com is the best way to get started. Now, personally, there's also a very small merch store on there, stickers, coffee cup, and a beach towel. It's COVID times. I can only put in the store what I'm able to ship to people, but it's there. The Patreon link is there. I'm rendering out this video of me exploring my new Compact 286. It's almost an hour freaking long. What was that? So be sure to look out for that on the Patreon. Other than that, that's it. Thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to everyone tomorrow. Take care.